Hi everyone, Adrian Player here, investment mortgage broker. In this video, we're going to be talking about something very juicy. We're going to be talking about the data and analytics platforms. Okay, we've been seeing a rise of the last 5 to 6 years. Data. Every second buyer's agent that comes up on your screen says that they've got the data, and then everyone is manipulating the data to see what the early warning signs are, and then everyone's watching the podcasts and the YouTube to figure out where the herd is. And then we saw everyone going around like a huge buying group around the country. So what did we see? We saw everyone buying up Brisbane, and then what happened was everyone went over to Perth. And then they were buying up around Armidale and then Forestfield. And then what happened after that? Then they started going more towards the outskirts of Perth, like places like Butler and Medina in the south. Then where did people go? They went down to Rockingham. And then the ones that were in front of the herd were already buying up Mandurah. Okay, and then once they started moving down to Mandurah, people were already buying up Bunbury and all around Bunbury. And then after Bunbury, half of the people came back into Perth and started buying up all the units, the townhouses and the villas, because the houses had gone through the roof. And you saw a lot of that behaviour in Brisbane as well, with the prices ran on the houses, then a huge 10 to 15 year gap between the houses and the units and the townhouses and the villas. And then everyone came in Perth and Brisbane and bought up all the units, the townhouses and the villas, because the value was there. And then the smart money that wasn't doing that already saw that Cairns had started going through the roof. So anyone that was smart was early into Townsville, and then everyone was buying up Townsville, Cairns, Bundaberg, Mackay, Rockhampton. But the problem with 3 of those areas are half of it is flood prone. So you saw a lot of buying pressure pushed into like Mackay in the north. There's only like 3.5 suburbs that are non-flood zone, right? So we call that the Golden Triangle. And it's very similar to Bundaberg in the south, where the north floods quite a bit, but the south there's like 4.5 suburbs that are non-flood zone on the hospital side of the river. So you saw the same kind of concept, but then overlying on top of all of this was that the buyer's agents and their marketing got bigger and bigger, and their buying list got longer and longer. And that worked while there was many people buying in many areas, and there was a lot of value right up until about the end of 2024, into middle of 2024, right? So then what did we start seeing? So after we saw Townsville go through the roof and northeast Queensland, then we came to a point where the risk taking started going up through the roof. So you started to see the buyer's agents that focus on one location still trying to spruik their location, even though they've gone through like 60 to 80% run in a 4 to 5 year period. Some of them went up higher than 100%, right? So we saw a lot of that. Then what did we see? So we saw a lot of the rate changes occur at the end of 2022, where 13 rate rises happened. Okay, so we saw that. And then all the borrowing power dropped through the floor. So a lot of people started using second and third tier lenders a lot more. And then the rise of people buying through companies and corporate trusts and accountant sign-offs and things like that to increase borrowing power. And the glory period worked while everyone was in WA and Queensland, where you get a land tax structure per trust. Okay, and all the properties were cheap, 300 to 550 grand. The rents were surging, and you got a land tax threshold per trust. And it was very easy to make a trust profitable, especially if you built a granny flat. All right, so you went through a glory period of people buying up a lot of property, but then the rates went through the roof and the properties went through the roof in WA and Queensland. And it's a lot harder to do that kind of strategy in areas like South Australia, because Adelaide went through the roof. Everyone was buying up Elizabeth and Salisbury and Hallett Cove, and then they started buying at the back of Hackham after that, and then they started buying in closer to the main city, and then they bought up all the units and the townhouses after the houses ran. So very similar concept happened in the Adelaide market. Now, what happened with the data platforms and the bigger the buyer's agencies got? So let's use an example. Let's use Darwin as an example. So when we looked at Darwin, and Darwin, the stats only really looked good probably 9 to 12 months ago. And you've got to ask yourself a couple of questions. One, did Darwin look good by itself in isolation? Did Darwin look good because the rest of the country had gone up? So by default, against the other metrics, it looked good. Did Darwin look good because it was actually going through its growth cycle by itself? Did Darwin look good because a couple of really big buyers agents went up all at the one time and bought up all of the stock within a month, and then the data looked good? So it almost turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy when you've got such a big herd of sheep following each other around the country and trying to get the podcasts and the YouTube and the data and analytics to figure out what's next. You've got some that are front running the crowd, and you've got some like me that have 1,600 investors on my books. So I know where people are buying before it comes out. So I'm an insider, right? So I know before it comes out on the podcast and the YouTube, and by the time it's already come out on that, most of the time it's too late. An area has already gone up. But it turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So I'll give you an example. Mildura. So Mildura, some of my investors were buying that up in 2020 for 160 to 210 grand, and then they were selling somewhere between, say, 450 and 500, and some sold in the early 500s. I'm still seeing to this day the data look good there, and I checked it about 6 to 9 months ago, and one of the big data and analytics platforms had Mildura as like the second most researched area in the whole country. So they were still loading people in as the exit liquidity to the smart money that bought it in 2020 and 2021 at 550 plus. 550 plus for Mildura. Now, I'm not saying if Mildura is a good long-term hold, but on the balance of probabilities, there is a good chance that if all the investors leave and the owner-occupiers and the first-home buyers won't pay the overs, there's a lot of these markets in the last 20 to 25 years that are boom and bust 30 to 60%. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there is a chance of that happening. And if you're buying in right at the end after a 6-year bull run, probably you've got more risk than others, right? And the ones that sold and take risk off the table, especially in these small regional markets, and sell before the herd, then they're taking risk off the table. So all I want to talk about here is holistically about how big the herd is, how big these buyers agents have gotten. It almost turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy that if they funnel enough investors into a market, the data shows what they want it to show. All right, and now we're at the end of this cycle now where the prices have started coming down, and a lot of these investors don't realize some of these markets that they're in are so heavily bought up by investors that there's no exit liquidity. So you might have to put the price down heavily to get out, or you might be stuck for 8, 10 or 12 years holding a property with no exit liquidity. And look, if you bought in for a very cheap price and you hold for the next 30 years, I'm sure a lot of people are going to do well. But there's a lot of people that have tapped a lot of equity and tried to get their next and next and next property, and they've got high LVRs and they've tapped a lot of equity, and they think they've made money until they haven't, until the market turns. And that's where a lot of the risk is, especially where a lot of these buyers have bought in the last 18 months. So that's my thoughts on the property investment and the data analytics space. What do you think? Send me a message. More than happy to talk. Take care. Bye.